we have a set of carbs here from 1983 V45 Magna. Another one of Honda's powerhouses. This one here has been sitting for 18 years. So I cracked open these carbs and voila, this is what we found. Although there wasn't a terribly large amount of fuel in these carburetors were not drained. Like we've always said, drain the carbs. If you're gonna let it sit, empty the tank or fill the tank right up to the top. Don't let any air in there. Turn the fuel off, drain the carbs, or run the engine until she dies, and then drain the carbs so that there's nothing left, nothing to rot. What can happen to these carbs is that if there's any kind of water content in these carbs, not only the jets will go like this, but it can also cause a lot of damage in the carbs. So we're gonna pull these jets out, and then I'm gonna pull this cover and then the CV covers and take those out and then get this carburetor set ready for the acid bath. 7 mil box end, 9 point inside there. You don't want to use too much pressure to get them off. There we go. That one's pretty good. And do the same here. Oh yeah, look at that. Yeah, that's been there a long time. This is rotten fuel that makes it green, like that. Okay, this is degraded fuel. We're gonna take a look at these other ones too. Okay, now here's something interesting. Look at this. Take a look inside there on just how caked up it was. The whole atomization tube is just covered in this stuff. You can actually, if you look really closely, they're so plugged up. Just tiny, tiny, tiny holes within all the crud that's in there. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the pilot jets out. See little tiny atomization holes in that pilot jet? Well, those are the same thing as like the big ones, atomization tube, where the actual fuel that goes through this pilot jet gets mixed with air and fuel and goes into the carburetor. The fuel travels into this, underneath this cap in here, and there's tiny little holes inside here. Well, those are for the pilot fuel to come out and idle the engine while this butterfly is just open just a tiny little bit. So negative pressure that it goes past this butterfly and pulls the fuel out so that the engine can idle. Now, if you look down here particularly, I've got a good light there. You can actually go into this pilot jet canal and look down it. Just all the way down. It goes through a little canal in here. Now, if you look really closely, this canal here, right here, is an actual canal leading from this one here, goes through here, and it goes up into here, into this area here, and then it comes out of those little holes. These are the old pilot jets. This is one of the main jets. See how plugged up those are? I'm going to show you a brand new main jet and a brand new pilot jet. That is a brand new main jet. That's what meters the fuel to go into the Ventura or the carburetor and then into the engine. This is a new pilot jet. Tiny, very whole. It's almost like the size of a human hair. And that's all that engine needs to take that liquid fuel, go through atomization, and then pulled into the Ventura of the carburetor right here. Goes through those little openings in there and get sucked into the engine. Those droplets are so small that they turn into, once they're compressed, they atomize. They get even smaller than what they are. And it turns into a very, very fine vapor. And when the piston compresses that gas to the top of the cylinder, and then when the spark plug fires, you get the burn off, which expands very, very rapidly, about 2.2 nanoseconds, and then heats the air 8 times the volume of what it normally is. And it expands very quickly and pushes that piston down. And then when it pushes that piston down and it comes around again and the exhaust valve opens, that expansion you hear is the pop that's coming out of the actual exhaust pipe. Sounds like an explosion or a bang or a fire. It's that crack that happens inside the actual cylinder that heats that air supercritical and pushes the piston down. Piston comes back up, pushes it out the exhaust valve, and out the tailpipe it goes, and that's where you get that pump. So normally I use a little bit of this here just to start off. It'll start to soften up all that green stuff that's on there. So now we're going to take the actual needle and seats and floats out. On the needle and seat, right there. That ring is the difference between this needle and seat sealing right or not. Right there, where the screwdriver is, you can actually see it. There's a tiny ring in there, okay? You see where it's wet and shiny? That there will determine whether this needle and seat will seal and shut off the fuel flow properly or not. If they have a little ring on them like that, that's a wear mark. And 90% of the time that's caused by it opening and closing, opening and closing, opening and closing. Sometimes it can also be caused by rotten fuel. And 90% of a carburetor's biggest enemy is rotten fuel. Okay. Now obviously we can't use this needle and seat again, but for educational purposes, that's what rotten fuel does to carburetors. This is exactly what happens over winter time. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that this will happen if you run your machine every 2 or 3 months during the winter. If you run it once a month and let it run for 15, 20 minutes, rev it up a couple of times and then shut it down, then at least you have fuel moving through the system. Chances of it's not going to get stagnant and it's not going to rot. Now, on these guys here, these are the actual, what I call the CVs. If you look inside here, I can't move that cylinder. It's locked in position. Okay, that's rotten fuel that's causing that thing to lock in that position. So we pulled them out, and then we give them a really good cleaning. That's actually a CV cylinder. That's the metering needle. With the engine running, they move up and down like this. And they actually meter the fuel that's coming out of that jet, like that. So when you actually hit full throttle, this thing goes like this. And just, there goes fuel. This is where the constant velocity cylinders fit. Now, what happens in a case like this is that if you look closely down here, there's an opening in here, okay, which allows pressure. Some will go in here, lift up the piston, okay, the air is in here, so pressure comes in, okay, and the spring pushes it down. And these are vent bleeders here. The air comes in through here, and some of this air gets filtered down into the float roll itself. This is the atomization tool. I've got to try and get that out. Now that we've got these things basically apart, now they got to go into the acid bath. And I'm going to let them sit in the cold acid for a while. The acid will not bother the rubbers. It's only detrimental to rotten fuels and things like that. The body of the carburetors have been soaked in acid and then power washed with really, really scalding hot water. And then every venue within the actual carburetors that has been pressure fed with water to chase all the acid out. The actual seats have been cleaned and the new gaskets replaced on them, so they're ready. The biggest problem with this one here was with the chokes. This is the choke system right here. They were sticking really bad. So what I had to do is I had to go through here and then all the way up through here. This is the actual siphon tube for the choke, where it actually sucks fuel from the bowl and then mixes it with air, and then it comes through this canal in here, up into here, and then when this valve is open, then that fuel and air mixture come through here. And each barrel has one of those holes. Now you can't see it in that hole there. If I move this choke plate, you might see a valve move inside there. So now what we need to do is we need to put in the main jets, and none of these jets have been modified to be larger or smaller. There's stock numbers, and that's the way I prefer to leave them, because this bike is running a stock air cleaner system, so you don't want to go modifying that. Usually about just maybe not quite a quarter turn after lightly seated is plenty for these. We're going to go with the pilot jets. Now you might be able to see a light through that pilot jet, maybe, maybe not. But in there, it's a very, 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 very tiny hole. Actually smaller than this drill bit. About 8 times smaller than that drill bit. Needle and seat. You see a little dot right there. Look at that little nub on top of the actual seat. Needle fits. And then we take a pin. Put the pin in there. Get it in, and that's it. This little nub right here in the actual needle is spring loaded, and what it does is kind of like a soft close. When the float reaches the level, this is the float. It's basically the metering system. The float works in conjunction with this needle and the seat, and it meters the fuel for the bowl, allows a certain amount of fuel to come in, and then shuts it off. And there's a bit of a spring to this one. Well, that's what this little spring here is. I call it a soft shut off, where the valve drops down, stops the fuel. If there's a little bit more coming out, and the tension gets on that spring, and it just allows it to close softly. Not all carburetors have that.